Hi, this is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman, and you're watching Sci-Fi Autograph Hunters.
And I guess I should give you some background on when I came to the show. It was back in 1992, and I was in LA doing a project. I think I was doing a sitcom with Christine Ebersole. I was doing some other show, and I had done a lot of voiceovers in New York commercially. And my agent said, you know, they're doing this new show at Warner Brothers, Batman. I said, new show? Batman's been around forever. He said, but they've never done an animated show on Batman. So I went in to meet the people. I had never done an animated voice. It was the first one I went in on. And I read the script, and I remember thinking, oh, I want to do like Bullock. I want to do, you know, the character voices. Those would be a lot more fun. Batman's just, you know, he's just the leading man. That's usually the least interesting role in the script. And so I went in and I said, can I get a stab at Bullock? And they said, but don't you understand, Batman will be in every episode. You would be in every show. It's the lead. Don't you want to do that? So they said, what do you know of Bruce Timm? I met Bruce Timm and Paul Dini and Andrea Romano. And they said, what do you know about Batman? I said, well, I know the Adam West series from the 70s. They said, no, that's not at all what we're doing. It has nothing to do with it. This is The Dark Knight. It goes back to the original sort of epic cartoon, graphic novels. So they described it to me. A young man loses his parents in a brutal murder as a child, and is raised by the butler and lives in the shadows, creates this cave under the mansion, and leads a double life, and is avenging his childhood injuries and avenging his parents' death. And I remember saying, well, you're kind of telling the Hamlet story. This is a classic story. And they said, well, no one's really put it that way before. So I just kind of put myself, I used my imagination, and I just put myself in a head where I came up with the darkest, the sound that I thought would come out of that kind of profound pain. And the sound that came out was just this very husky, dark sound. And I started doing the character like this. And as I was doing it, I saw everyone in the booth probably sort of running around. And I thought, well, I've either done something really good or something really bad, because I was getting a strong reaction. And they essentially told me that day, they said, well, you know, you got it. We've been looking at hundreds of people, we couldn't find it. You know, whenever you go in on casting, it's so interesting, because a lot of people can imitate the sound of the voice that I do for the character, but they don't, sorry.
I was worried about mine doing that.
But the trick is coming up with the voice to begin with. A lot of people can do imitations, but it's getting that sound out of thin air that is making that choice. That's what the producers are paying for when they hire trained actors. Because most producers and directors, they don't really know what they're looking for. You go in, they don't give you any direction at all. In this, all they told me was the background on the character. You go in, always when you go in, you say, what are you looking for? And they would say, well, let's see what you got. Let's see what you got. Just show us something. Because they really don't know what they're looking for, usually. They're waiting for it to walk through the door. And so a lot of the getting a role, sort of 80% of getting a role is making the right choice when you come into the audition. And I just happened to make the right choice that day. There are, I'm sure, dozens of other actors who could have played that role, who just didn't happen to make the right choice when they went in for the reading. And they weren't getting direction from anybody. And that's true of almost anything you see. There are always a number of actors who are just as good who can play a role, but they may not have just made the right choice the day of the audition, so they didn't get it. So 80% of it is just making the right decision on the right choice that day and coming up with that sound. And then as I got to know the character, I thought, okay, now I've really got to get into this guy and figure this out. And I said to them, you know, he's the wealthiest man in Gotham. He's the most eligible bachelor. Everyone knows him. He's got the big house on the hill. He's, you know, Steve Jobs and Michael Bloomberg and, you know, whoever, all rolled into one. How can this guy put on a cape and a cowl and no one knows him? That's just impossible. So let's not suspend belief so much. Why don't you let me do two voices? And let me use my own voice for Bruce Wayne. And then I'll use the voice that I used in the audition for Batman. Why don't we try that? So they thought, well, that's kind of an interesting idea. So that's where the two-voice idea came up. And it made a lot of sense. And then we did like the first 6 episodes, and then they, you know, things evolve organically. Any kind of artistic endeavor evolves organically. So in animation, you record the show first, like a radio play. You're all in the room together and you're recording from a script. And then they take those recordings and they send them to the artists. And then they paint to the recordings. So we have the first input, really. Then the visuals come back, and a process called ADR is syncing up the visuals to the soundtrack that's been recorded. And there's always extra mouth flaps that they've painted in it, or not enough mouth flaps. And so then you've got to sort of doctor the script a little bit to fit what the artists have actually created. And then it gets on the air. So there's a 6-month period between recording before you ever see anything. And then there's another few months before it actually gets on the air. So during that 6 months, we were recording shows. And then they started seeing the artwork coming back, and it was much darker. Because, you know, as you know, the show's painted on a black background, which was the first time that was done. So it was very noir. There was a very film noir feel to it. It was a full symphony orchestra. It was hand-painted cells in Korea. So they doubled the budget on this show that they usually spent on a half-hour show. And it looked, that's why the show looked so rich, is because they invested in it. And it's why we're all here 22 years later, is because it was so good. So when it came back, that first group of shows came back, they realized it was much darker than they had anticipated it being. And they loved that. But that the voice I had been using for Bruce Wayne, which is sort of like the voice I'm using right now, was very, you know, kind of charming guy, you know, just me, was a little too light. It just seemed too funny. I was actually using a lot of humor. I was doing things, a lot of sarcasm. He had a real sarcastic edge to him, which I thought was great to contrast to the Batman character. And it was, but it didn't work in this noir, dark world that they created. So I actually had to go back and re-record the first like 6 episodes, just the Bruce Wayne voice, just to tone him down, to make him closer to the Batman voice. Because they liked the distinction idea, but it just had to be very subtle. So there was a lot of tweaking to the show when it was first created. And, but as word got out what was going on, you know, Hollywood's a very small community, actually. Everyone kind of knows each other. A lot of people work with each other. The writers know each other. The studios know what's going on at the other studios. Word got around of the quality of the show and what it was looking like and what these bookings were like. They were so much fun. So everyone started to want to come to do the show. So the booking sessions started to get really interesting. I mean, there were really good actors coming in. And after, like, I think the 100th episode, Warner Brothers took out a 2-page ad, I remember, in Variety to thank everybody who'd been involved in the show. And the list of actors' names was just incredible. You saw them all spread out like that. You thought, God, everyone in town has come in on this show. And that's what it got to be like every week. It was really fun to do because you never knew who was going to walk through the door. And there was a real element of play in the room. Warner Brothers likes to get actors all together in the recording room together. Disney likes separate recordings. You're alone in a booth, you create the character yourself, and in post-production, that gives them a lot more control, because they have 100% clean takes of each voice. So it gives the editors ultimate control on what they edit and link together, loop together. With Warner, when you're all recording in the same studio together, there's a lot of, there'll be overlaps, there'll be, it's a lot more complicated technically for the editors, but the performance quality is, I think, 10 times better. Because you just get actors feeding off of each other, and that's what acting's all about. Part of the reason I think I was successful with what I did was because I had Mark Hamill to work off of. And Mark has said the same to me. When we get in a room together, we're both twice as good as we would be if we were alone. And the same was true of a lot of the other actors that we brought. They brought in, Andrea Romano, who cast it and directed, is the best in the business. She did Pinky and the Brain, Animaniacs. I mean, the list is just, right now I think she has 7 different shows she's working on. So she got to be kind of legendary herself in who she could get to come in. So that's how the show evolved. And ultimately, the only reason they stopped doing Batman the Animated Series, the original show, was because Bruce and Paul kind of ran out of ideas. The studio wanted more, the actors wanted to do more, the audience wanted more, everyone wanted more. Bruce just kind of got burned out and wanted to do something different. So they did Batman and Robin, and then the Justice League, and then they went to Batman Beyond. So it evolved over time, but it was just because, you know, think about it, story ideas. How do you come up with hundreds of story ideas? You ultimately run out. And that was the only reason they stopped doing the original show. Because it was, when it ended, it was still hugely popular. What else can I tell you about the evolution of the show? Well, you have any questions? Yes?
How about the video games?
Oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting thing. Because that's like a different career. It's a different business now. It's a new business. Do you know the studios are making more from video games than they are from feature films now? They can make $1 billion.
I wonder why.
With a B.
You're going to see that in about 2 months.
dollars on a new game. You know, it's unbelievable how much money they make. Of course, the actors don't get any of that money, but the studios make a lot more. It's a totally different animal, because what I just said about Warner being so great to bring all the actors together in the booth together, and so you get to feed off each other, and it's like playing ball when you were a kid. Gaming, you are totally alone in the booth, because it's done line by line by line by line by line. And you'll do a line, and they'll say, okay, now give us 3 takes of each of the line. And they'll go, okay, now, can you do that with a little more irony? So you do the 3 with a little more irony. Okay, can you give us the irony with a little bit of a smile? Okay, a little smile. Okay, now look, do that irony and the smile, but with just kind of an edge to it. Okay, keep the irony, the smile, the edge, we love that, but how you want to kill him? And you're like, how do you do irony, smile, edge, and kill at the same time? So it gets to be like, you almost forget how to speak English by the time you get out of the booth. And you do it at 4-hour blocks in this room alone. And all through that, you're trying to keep Batman voice alive and the Batman character alive. So it's not just you know, mouthing lines. You're trying to actually act, but without anyone to act off of. So it's totally internal, and it's just line after 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 line for 4 hours. Then you get an hour break, and then you go for 4 hours again. And that's a day. And with a big show, you'll do a week of that. And then a few months later, they'll pull you back for another week of that. So it's very disjointed. Some of the big games like Arkham and Arkham Asylum, I'll work on those for a year. And every couple of months, I'll just go into the booth for days and days and days and days, just doing line after line after line after line.
Were you happy with your results of that?
Well, that's the thing. When you see it and it's done, you think, oh man, I was a part of that. You know, that's so awesome. But the process of getting there isn't anything like the rewarding feeling you get out of acting.
Rage quit table flip.
Huh?
Rage quit table flip.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, you could really go crazy. You could go crazy.
White drinking.
And, but you're right. I mean, the results, when I saw Arkham, when I saw those graphics, I thought, wow, this is so awesome. This is just amazing. I was happy to be a part of it. Yeah.
What was it like working with the movie Mask of the Phantasm?
Well, that was interesting because that was the first one. That was the first Batman movie, animated movie. And Dana Delaney, I happen to know from New York, gosh, 30 years ago. Oh. I was working, huh?
You still look awesome.
Yeah. 30 years ago, I was doing a play for Joseph Papp at the Public Theater. I was doing Midsummer Night's Dream in Central Park with William Hurt and Christine Baranski and Deborah Rush. And Deborah and I were hanging out a lot together at that time. She's a wonderful actress. And she's a good friend of Treat Williams. And Treat at the time was dating Dana Delaney, this young actress that really hadn't done anything yet. So I knew Dana from 30 years ago. And we'd never worked together though, but we'd sort of known each other. And so it was so much fun having her come in to do Mask of the Phantasm. And it was interesting because it was a lot like doing the animated series, because it was Andrea still directing it. But it was just bigger, you know? It was just on a bigger scale. We spent more time on it. They were a little more nudgy on the nuances of the performance. The fun thing was being able to do a story more fully and a more evolved story. Because it really gets into Bruce Wayne's psyche and personal life, and that was fun. Because, you know, Batman is really, it's funny being the voice of a guy who's the strong silent type, you know? So you have very few lines to make your point with, so that it's got to be strong. But in Phantasm, I got to do much more vocally, so I got just much more time to tell my story. Because there are some shows where I literally have, you know, a dozen lines. The villains are the one who usually get all the fun stuff.
Monologuing.
Yeah, Mark Hamill, I mean, my God. He just gets to dance all over the room. You know? But, yeah.
Right, some actors don't like to watch themselves or listen to themselves or even play the video games. How are you with yours?
Boy, that's really a good question. I hate watching myself. I hate watching myself on camera. I never watch my own shows.
You don't make yourself sit there and watch it?
I know I'm supposed to learn from
To
myself.
critique yourself,
It's a
yeah.
critique. I just,
Makes you nitpick.
oh, I just,
I should've done this
I'm
this
never
way.
as handsome as I think I am, you know. I'm just kidding. I know, I never, it's so hard to watch yourself. I hate watching myself. I shouldn't say I never do. I do occasionally force myself to, just to learn from camera angles and that kind of stuff. But voice stuff I love listening to, because, especially because I had no history in it. I had to learn about that. So, and I can learn from a lot of the other voice actors. I mean, there are people who are pure voice actors who, they can make you believe a lion is in heat sitting right next to you. I mean, the noises that come out of some of these guys is unbelievable. So the animated stuff I do watch, because that I can really learn from. Because it's kind of a trick. You only have your voice to tell the story, but you can't do it so much that it's cartoony. So it's a really fine line to walk. And I've seen a lot of actors come in to bookings because it's very popular now to do animation, so everybody wants to do it. So you get a lot of film actors and TV actors coming in who've never done it. And the studio loves it because they have a name on things. But I've watched them come in and just crash and burn because there's a lot more nuance to it than people think, because you do only have your voice to tell it, to tell the story. And a lot of actors are just used to using their faces. You are your instrument. You know, as I'm talking to you, I'm using my body. You don't get that in voiceover. So, but they want more reality now than they ever did, especially in dramatic animation like Batman. So they don't want cartoony sounds. But if someone comes in and just does a straight, you know, street voice, movie type read, it's going to be dead. And I've seen Andrea work with someone. Oh, could you try that again, please? Can you try that again, please? Just give it a little boost, just try that. And I hear it, and it comes out the same over and over and over. And I can see the actor getting frustrated because they think they're changing. Because you get stuck in a groove, and you don't realize you're doing the same thing over and over again, if you've never done it before. They think they're making adjustments, and I'm listening to them going, it sounds the same, it sounds the same. And I've been in shows, recordings, where Andrea is such a wonderful person. She knows how to work with actors. She will never humiliate someone. There are some directors who really humiliate actors, who just don't like them. And they'll like try to beat the performance out of you. And it never gets anyone anywhere. But there are some, you know, some people just don't like actors, and they're in the business. Andrea loves actors. And so she really coaxes performances out of people. But if she can't get it after 6, 7 tries, I've seen her say, thank you everyone, that was a great recording. Congratulations, everyone applauds. Everyone's, oh Kevin, could you come up here afterwards? Could you just, there's something I have to have you sign. And I'll go up and I'll go, what's going on? She says, what's your schedule like this afternoon? I said, why, what's going on? She said, because we're going to have to recast that role. We need you to come back and read opposite the person. I don't want anyone to know what you're doing. And that's a very cool thing to do. She didn't want to humiliate the person. I've seen her do that a couple of times. And that's, you know, that'll happen when someone has no history in doing animation voices. Because it's trickier than people realize. It looks simple, and it should look simple. You don't want the audience to see the gears and the ugly machinations, but there's just more to it. So I do listen to my voiceover stuff, but I'm terrible at watching myself on film.
On that line, the American cartoons, you don't have in the background the scenes going by, whereas in the Japanese anime, the actors get to see their character. So you guys are playing off on just basically what's on the script and what's in the head.
Imagination. It's all in your imagination.
Yeah, I found that to be, you know, really unique because...
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Well, I was amazed because, as I say, this was my first experience in it. But I didn't know it was going to last 22 years and become, you know, a career. But I was shocked, as you are, that they gave me the script, and I said, this is like a play script. This is a script. They said, yeah. I said, well, where's the animation? He said, oh, that comes much later. You guys are first. I thought, that's amazing. It's to the point where Bruce and Paul, who are, you know, incredible artists in what they created, occasionally they get stuck. And they go, oh, come on, Kevin, what would he say? Come on, you've been doing them now for years. What would he say? And so, you know, because it's so early in the process, you get to have, you know, little input.
Cool.
So it's fun. Yeah.
With that, actually, is there a particular line that you helped create?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, there have been hundreds and hundreds of, you know, episodes and movies and stuff, so. I'd love to take credit for I Am Vengeance, I Am the Night, I Am Batman. But they'd kill me, because I can't. I didn't come up with that. But, no, just little things, like, you know, it's, you know, how would he say this, how would he go there, you know, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I remember you saying you working with people who are strictly voice actors. have you ever worked with James Arnold Taylor or Jim Cummings?
Oh, yeah. Jim Cummings is unbelievable. They're both unbelievable.
I really want to get to meet, well, I've met one of them. I want to get to meet the other because I've seen just how incredibly just crazy they get while they're recording it.
Yeah.
Like James Arnold Taylor in his show wearing a straight jacket and they were doing everything like that. It was just hilarious.
Some people, it's so interesting, some people sit and it's all very internalized and they sit during recordings. And other people, the more animated people, the ones who, you know, are like this in the recording room, tend to stand. And one of them is Mark Hamill. And Mark, when he stands, he'll stand and he's doing the Joker. And, you know, it's like he looks like the Joker when he's doing the Joker. Physically, his whole voice, he's got a kind of rubbery face. And he's, yeah! And this thing comes out of him, and his voice gets wet, and you're looking at him going, whoa! He is acting, isn't he? You know, it's, some people just, it gets really, really wild. He's a very talented guy. He's out there. Yeah.
Since you're able to actually be there with the other actors when you were recording, you got to work with Adam West. Did you guys ever end up talking shop, talking Batman?
You know, it was so funny meeting him because he was the Batman of my youth. And you always kind of feel like you're stepping on someone else's toes if they've really established territory someplace. But no one, you know, owns any territory. Like they have other people now doing the voice in more recent animated stuff for Warner Brothers, the Batman voice. You know, it's always up to the producer who they want to hire. But I was trepidatious meeting him because I thought, you know, he was Batman when I was growing up. And but he's such a cool guy. He's very, he's kind of an old school actor. He's very elegant. He's very, you know, a lot of younger actors come in, they look like, you know, they didn't shower. They're really grungy, you know, where's the script? Is there a script? You know, he comes in and he's practically got it memorized. He's so prepared. He's a really class act. And he was wonderful as the Grey Ghost. They loved him so much that they brought the character back. So I really enjoyed working with him. Yeah.
Aside from Mark Hamill and him being the epic Joker that he is, were there any other actors in particular who you thought were, wow, I love getting to work with him as a villain?
Wow, actually there were so many. I do get asked that a lot, and it's so hard to... Michael Ansara as Mr. Freeze was really wonderful. There were so many. Oh, you know, a lot of the female villains were really great. Adrienne Barbeau as Catwoman was so much fun. She was great. And then Tara Strong did it later. She's a very talented voice actor. There have been so many good villains on the show. Ron Perlman did one. Which one it was? It was so many years ago, but he was really good. I've got to go through my Rolodex and figure out the names of who did what villains, because I get asked that question a lot, and I'm always stumbling for the answer because there were so many people they brought in. They were all so good. Yeah.
Have you ever had any inputs on a live action movie? Or have you
No.
ever been approached for a live action movie?
No. It's like another part of the business. I did a lot of TV in the 80s and 90s. And I did a lot of theater in the 70s and 80s. But I haven't done anything live action since the late 90s.
You said sometimes that you get input with the characters? Has there ever been times where there's been like a particular line or something and it just didn't fit?
Well, I thought so, yeah, and sort of said, you know, I just wouldn't say that. This just doesn't sound right. And usually, because, you know, I'm a very easy person to work with. I'll basically say anything they tell me to say. So if I say something doesn't feel right, they know that it's probably pretty bad. And usually when I say that, they'll all throw their hands up in the air and they'll go, we know, we hate it. What, you know, we hate it too, but we couldn't think of what to say. You know, usually if I don't think something's good, they've already been down that road already. And they know that it was the only line they could come up with. They couldn't think of the right thing, you know.
It's kind of like you're catching them.
Exactly, exactly. Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, any blooper or any stuff funny happen?
Oh, there are great bloopers, but you know, the funniest one was, it wasn't actually a blooper, it was sort of an intentional blooper. You know, I'm always doing, there's always fight scene noises and exhales and grunts. And so one day, I don't know why I did it. I was always trying to keep things light in the recording studio. And Andrea knew what I was doing. I was intentionally doing it because I was the unifying theme throughout all those shows. I was the one person who was in everything. And especially when there were so many guests coming in who had never done animation before, they didn't know what they were getting into. So if the person who was there for fun and was, you know, being a little bit of a bad boy, getting people laughing, it just broke the tension and it made everyone act better. Andrea knew what I was doing. I was getting everyone to, you know, the juices going. So she let me do it. She gave me a lot of leeway. And even Bruce, who's much more sober than Andrea, he realized after a while that it was good that I was a bit of a cut up, you know, in there. But one day I was doing my grunts and groans, and it was a big group, and a lot of the people had never done any voiceovers before. I was like, Andrea. He just said the director's name at the end of that, like it was, you know, post-coital bliss. And the place, there was this hesitation by all these actors. And then everyone just cracked up. Everyone just roared. They couldn't believe what I had done. And then we look in the booth, and like Andrea is just on like this, you know. Everyone was just dying. It was so funny. And then she said, that's going on my holiday reel, Kevin. But then it sort of started a tradition. The following week, I had another big fight. I was like, you know, Joker, I'll get you. And then we heard from the booth, and then you say, oh, Andrea. And anyone who was new that week would be like, what is going on here? And it got to be a thing going on and on and on. And it was a lot of fun. And it was a sort of an ongoing gag in the studio. And I didn't realize that at Christmas, Andrea played all the Andreas. She'd been recording them all and keeping them, and she put them on a reel. It was like, Andrea. It was great.
Was that a Christmas gift to you?
No, she just played it for everyone in the room. It was very funny. It was very funny. Back there?
Do you have like a favorite edition of Batman?
You know, I get asked that a lot, and I should give it more thought, because I always come up with the same show because I love doing it so much, but there have been others that I really love. I loved Sub-Zero just because of the visuals of it. I think the art in Sub-Zero is phenomenal. The opening sequence, I don't know if you remember, is looking up through the ice of the North Pole, and you're seeing the paths of polar bears running on the ice. That's the first animation you see. And I remember seeing that going, that is just beautiful artwork. The artwork in Sub-Zero is phenomenal. But that being said, the one I had the most fun recording, and I think is also beautiful art, is an episode of the original series called Perchance to Dream. And it was, you know, actors like to be challenged, and it was, I didn't just do the Batman Bruce Wayne voice, but the story is that Batman is drugged, and he's taken over by this gas. So, and the gas makes him go back to his childhood and relive his worst dreams, which was watching his parents get killed. And so I was playing Batman Bruce Wayne, and then I was playing young Bruce Wayne. And then I was playing Bruce Wayne Sr., my father. They had me do that voice too. And then I had to do the Batman drugged voice. So I was doing 5 voices in the same episode. And they all had to be distinct, but believably related and consistent. And I had a blast doing that episode. It was so much fun. It was just very challenging. And then when I realized that they were going to do a lot of the animation in black and white, when he goes into his past, I thought, this is really daring. It was a really adult themed story, and it was beautifully animated, and I thought it was very moving. Batman's struggling with himself. Bruce Wayne is struggling with himself. So that's one of my favorite shows. But in terms of artwork, probably Sub-Zero. Yeah.
Part of what I love about Batman as a whole is how incredibly interpretive it can be, that you can, from this one basic story, that you can get so many different versions, variations off of it. And you create something incredibly iconic with yours, with the animated Batman, which you then took through the other shows and media that you were working with. Were there any other versions of Batman beside your own that, between the movies, the other shows, and the comic books, is there any other version that you particularly enjoy?
Well, I think the most recent Batman movies, the Christian Bale movies, have been the closest to the Dark Knight original show, which is what we were basing the animated series on. So it's closest to what we were doing. That noir, very dark, very realistic feel. I think some of the earlier Batman movies were a little more cartoony than I would have liked. And I know I did a podcast, a thing with Kevin Smith recently, where he does a podcast called Fat Man on Batman. But if you haven't seen it, you should really see it. He's obsessed with Batman. And he got so upset about the early versions of the Batman movies that he actually had a physical altercation with one of the creators. The early stuff was very cartoony. The early movies. And the later ones, the Christopher Nolan movies were much closer to the real thing, I think, and the spirit of the show. But I love doing that podcast with Kevin Smith, by the way. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. It was really, really interesting. It's called Fat Man on Batman. Yeah.
Funny you say like the Nolan films, there's a line that is said in like the last movie that a lot of my friends, it's like, yeah, Christian Bale's voice kind of isn't good. So everyone's always thought, it's like, what would happen if you said that line? And I was wondering if it was okay if I give it to you, if you could read it. It's the...
Oh, I shouldn't do that. Yeah, I'm not going to dub Christian Bale.
Yeah, it's the...
That'll get me in big trouble.
Yeah, it's the line when he's in the Batmobile and he tells Commissioner Gordon, a hero can be anybody, even someone putting a coat on a little kid's jacket and letting him know that the world has invented Jack. And that's like something everyone's like, yeah, he did that weird like throat voice and this didn't work, and it's like, yeah, but it's like Kevin Conroy said it, I'm pretty sure it would work.
You're not going to get me to say that. No matter how hard you try. No, I know Christian Bale's gotten some criticism for the voice, but the movie in general, and he's such an incredible actor. Everything else he did with that role was phenomenal. And the movie in general is so beautiful. It's such a great movie. Yeah.
Speaking about that as well, I will definitely say that even though I do agree, I love your voice of actual Batman far more than his voice of Batman. But with that being said, I'm a very big fan of his version of Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
What do you think of his version of Bruce Wayne?
Oh, well, as I said, I think it's the closest to the original spirit of the story, and I think he's terrific as Bruce Wayne. He's great at that role. Did you ever see him in American Psycho?
Yes, one of my personal all-time favorite movies, and I especially love the. You ever listen to Huey Lewis in the News?
I love Huey.
And then get the axe right whenever you hear that. So whenever I hear somebody say that, I usually run now.
Yeah.
Now, I know originally Batman was written dark, and, I know the background, of course, is my age. But here you said you used to enjoy the 60s campy Batman, but you weren't too much of a fan of the comedy-type cartoons that they originally started making. So that's, if you liked the campiness of Adam West, I would think you would also like, the Batman cartoons that were...
Well, it's once it was all I knew, and I was a child, and it was fun, and it's all I knew. Once I realized what the Dark Knight was originally, and what Batman really was, which is an amazing parable of a person overcoming terrible pain to avenge his parents' murders for the rest of his life, spending his life trying to heal this psychic wound from childhood that he'll never be able to heal. But that's what he spends his life doing. Once I found all of that out, I realized that show from the 70s was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. And the earlier film versions were a little ridiculous too. And the later Christopher Nolan ones are much closer to what it should be. I mean, he's an archetypical hero. The reason he's resonated for so long is there's such pureness to his motives and to his spirit. He never kills anyone. He doesn't believe in death. He believes in salvation. Everyone gets put in Arkham because they're criminally insane, There's a reason he's lasted so long, and he resonates with so many people. And the audience generally is not kids for this show. I mean, it's mostly an adult audience because it's sort of a mature themed concept, what Batman's based on. He has no superpowers.
Right.
He can't walk through walls. He can't, fly. He's a thinker and a doer. He's someone it's about that hero concept. I spoke about it at the last con I went to. If you've ever heard of a philosopher named Joseph Campbell, if you haven't ever read any of him or heard about him, you really, because of your interest in this, you should read some of him. He wrote a wonderful book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, which is, Joseph Campbell was a great American thinker, and he did a series of interviews for PBS with Bill Moyers called The Power of Myth. And what he was a generalist in mythology. He studied Greek mythology, Roman mythology, Jewish Old Testament mythology, Christian mythology, early American Indian, Inca, South Pacific, African tribal, Celtic. He sort of was a generalist. He studied the world's mythologies. And he developed this overview. By doing this, he learned that there were certain themes that were universal to tribes thousands of years ago who could never have connected each other, but who were telling the same stories. Isn't that amazing? And some of the stories are amazingly similar. So you think, well, how could this possibly have happened? And the one most universal theme was the hero with 1,000 faces. It's the concept of a hero going through a transformative fire, and the fire purifying him, and his being resurrected, Christ-like, into a new figure who embodies truth and spirit and life and, you know, saves mankind. But there's always this, whether it's Ulysses or whether it's, you know, whoever the character is in history, especially in the early American Indian tribal stories, there were these stories of the hero who would do these journeys. And it was in every culture. And I can't remember all the different cultural stories, but it's a fascinating book to read. But Batman is that hero. He fits it perfectly. And you think, well, no wonder this is so popular with audiences. No wonder this resonates so much with people. It's been resonating with people for thousands of years. It's the same story. It's a great story. And to tell that story as a cartoon, it just doesn't do it justice. You know, it sort of diminishes it. So, so I love what Christopher Nolan did. He sort of ennobled it, you know, because I think it's a very important story. And it's why we all love it so much. It's why people react to it. There was a story recently in New York, you probably heard about it, where a guy, and he was just a guy, saw someone fall on the subway tracks. And the train was already coming. And this guy saw that it was too late to get the guy out of the subway tracks. So he jumped down on the guy. And he laid down on top of him in the gully between the tracks, because he knew that if the guy tried to stand up, he'd be decapitated. But if he stayed down, the train would roll over him. But this was an old man, and he'd stumbled down, and he was sort of staggering, trying to get up. And this Joe jumped down, threw himself on the guy, and saved his life, and let the train roll over them both in the gully. And I mean, it made the news, and everyone in New York was like, why did you do this? Why did you do this? You threw your life for this guy. He said, how could I not? That was his reaction. He said, I didn't even think of not doing it. It was such a heroic gesture. Everyone was talking about it in New York for days. It was like, did you see on the news? Did you see what that guy did? And it was a very Batman thing to do. And I thought, that's so Batman. Yeah.
Joseph Campbell says that when that kind of heroic act happens, that you're not being yourself, that you've plugged yourself into the universe. And
Absolutely.
you become part of the universe, so you don't see yourself as separate from the person on the track.
That's exactly right. You are the same person.
On the track.
That's
so
why he said, how could I not? Because
you're not thinking about my life unless you've plugged into the universe in that moment and done what the universe
That's
needs.
exactly right. And there was another story. I shot a series in Hawaii for about a year called Tour of Duty back in the 80s. And so I lived in Oahu for a while. And there was an incident where there's a place called the, what's it called, the something pass. There's a huge wind that comes up this mountain. And there's in Hawaiian folklore, there was an army that was charging, being pushed over the mountain, and the winds came so strong, it pushed the army back, and they defeated their enemy. And it's a big thing in Hawaiian cultural history. Well, that pass still exists, and those winds still exist. And tourists go up there, and it's really cool to like lean against the wind. And there are many Japanese tourists there, it's very popular with Japanese tourists, fell over the cliff. And a Hawaiian policeman ran and threw himself in the air to catch the guy, and caught the guy. But then he was off the ground. And people grabbed his legs. I mean, it all happened like boom, 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 and then they pulled them both back up. Because the winds didn't happen to be blowing that day. And everyone said to policeman, why did you do that? And he said the same thing. He said, how could I not? Because he had that moment of, it was him going over the cliff. He was so identifying with that person that he didn't even think of not doing it. And that, to me, those kind of stories I always think, that's Batman. That's the spirit of Batman. And that's why audiences love him so much. Yeah.
Yeah, so who do a better actor as the Joker? Jack Nicholson or
Heath Ledger?
Yeah, who do it better?
Boy, that's hard. Because I'm a big Jack Nicholson fan. But Heath Ledger? I didn't think I would ever think anyone was as good as Mark Hamill in the Joker, but Heath Ledger was.
Yeah,
he was brilliant. He was just brilliant. I think he went to that kind of crazy, scary, funny world that Mark Hamill finds. Jack Nicholson was, you know, funny, psychotic, but Heath Ledger, he went to that weird place that Mark finds. I think Heath Ledger was, God, that was such a tragedy. God, it was such a tragedy.
And he probably do the voice of the Joker too, to get a chance.
Oh, yeah.
Of all the different forms of media that you voiced, like Batman, like the games and the movies and the show, which one do you prefer? Which one was the most fun?
Most fun. The most fun was probably the series, just because I got to have long-standing relationships with so many people. The artistically most rewarding were probably the movies, just because you get to tell the story in a much larger format. Sub-Zero, Mask of the Phantasm, you know, any of the movies. It's a bigger format. You have a different stage to tell the story in. So in that sense, it's more fulfilling. But the original show, Batman the Animated Series, I gotta say, was just such a unique experience. And it went on for so long, and it was so much fun. And there were so many talented people involved in it that I really did love that. Yeah.
For you, what did you think was the funniest episode in the series, and like funniest moment for you with that?
Ooh, that's really hard.
So I know it's usually dark, but I think it's some really awesome, hilarious things.
Well, there have been some hilarious things between Mark and Harley Quinn. I mean, Harley Quinn is a great character.
Mm-hmm.
She was created by Paul Dini, and she's a great character. She's done some really outrageous, funny things. So it would have to be a Harley Quinn moment, probably. But I can't think of it right now. Although the scene when I sang "Am I Blue" I thought was pretty funny. And I said, read the script, I said, Batman sings? Do we really want to go here? No, that was pretty funny. Yeah. Yeah.
What was it like going from the Batman series, where it's, you know, pretty much just about Batman, to the Justice League cartoons?
Yeah, that's interesting, because it's, suddenly you're one of seven, you know? You're like sharing the stage. And there were episodes where I literally would have 2 lines. And you know, you're a man of few words to begin with, and then you're up against 6 other superheroes. Yeah, so I didn't have as much to do in that show, so it wasn't as much fun for me. But it was a good group of people. Carl Lumley, George Newberg. They were all terrific to work with, and I got to, you know, make some new friendships out of that, which was great. But you're right; it's much harder to be Batman. You've got everybody else to deal with. Yeah.
How is it like playing one of the only beings in existence to have actually been able to beat Superman.
Well, it was really cool. And actually, Tim Daly has a webcast called The Daily Show. And just last week, I recorded an episode of it where Batman pounces on Superman. So be sure to watch it. It's very funny. It's a good episode. Yeah.
What was it like what was it like to voice older Bruce Wayne in Batman Beyond?
Scary. It's like, is this what I'm going to sound like in 25 years? It was fun. It was fun. And Will Friedle is such a great guy. We developed a really nice friendship on that show. And it was a little weird to think that the character had aged that much in the course of the years I'd done him. But I had I think a lot of the trick with doing much older voices is just the pace of the voice. Young people tend to talk really fast, and older people, there's a lot more thought that goes into, and a lot more deliberation that goes into it. So a lot of aging Bruce was just the tempo of Bruce. But the shows were very well written, and Will was a great guy to work with. So I had a good time. Yeah?
Not about that yet, but is there a role in a play?
I can't hear you.
Is there a role in a play or anything that you've never been able to actually do that you really wanted to?
Well, I'm getting too old to do some of the roles I really wanted to do. I always wanted to do Edmund in Long Day's Journey, but I'm too old now. I'll probably end up doing Old Man, the Old Man. I've gotten to do a lot of really interesting plays. I worked with Edward Albee. I've worked with Eugene O'Neill. I mean, not Eugene, Arthur Miller. I worked with Arthur Miller on his last play, The Last Yankee in New York, before he died. I've really had an interesting career. When I was at Juilliard, it was the last group that John Houseman trained. There were amazing people there then. So I've been exposed to a lot of very interesting people, and I've had a lot of very interesting roles to play. I had a great time playing, I did a series of plays called The Greeks, and it was the whole Aristeia cycle done as a trilogy. It was originally at the Royal Shakespeare Company, and I did the American version. It was done at the Hartford Stage. And Gene Smart played Clytemnestra. Jay Sanders was Menelaus. It was a really interesting cast. And I was Orestes. That was a wonderful thing to be a part of. So I've done interesting, I've done some really interesting plays. There's always more I want to do. You know, there are thousands of plays. There's so much to do. Yeah.
In the Justice League cartoon where the two Bruces meet, the older Bruce and the younger Bruce end up meeting, what was that like?
Well, I like to make things complicated, so I asked Andrea if I could do it in real time, so I could have the conversations with myself. And she said, yeah, we'll do that, but then we're going to do them separately. So we know that if it doesn't work, we have an alternative to edit together. But it was fun. It was fun. Anyone else? How are we doing? Yeah.
I just remembered something from one of the DC comics is where, but I was gonna ask, do you think they should have done an episode where, like in the comic books, where Spider-Man comes into the DC universe and tries to sign up for the Justice League? Do you think that would have been an interesting episode?
Oh yeah, that would have been interesting. That would have been interesting. Who would we have gotten for Spidey? I don't know. But that would have been good. I never had as much to do in Justice League as I would like to have, because there were so many people to share the stage with.
Yeah, because in the comic book, Spider-Man ultimately gets rejected by Batman, so.
Oh.
Yes. So you would have had a lot more.
That would have been fun. So, okay.
Just real quick, for those of us who are, I don't know, the rare ones that are a little bit older, I met John Houseman, and
Did you?
Yes, I did, and I have to say, I knew about you, your theater acting, what you've done before being, a student of his, and then being, through him. I did find it, I have to admit, I found it really odd to first hear your voice in that anime, in the Batman, and I'm like, I know that voice, it cannot be, and we looked it up and found out it was you. So I guess I always wanted to know is how you felt making the transition from classical, as far as with John and his teachings, to the Batman, dark
Well, I
as it
tried to
was.
bring that to it. Even at the audition when I said, you're telling the Hamlet story. I mean, I always brought my background to Batman, and I think it's what kind of informed my performance. And I know the producers liked that. They appreciated that. When you're an actor, you are your instrument. They always say that. And you really are. You're everything, you're the sum of everything you've ever been a part of. When you go to acting school, they always say, go to the museums. Go to concerts. Expose yourself to other forms of art, because it'll all inform your performances. It makes you a richer person. And so I always went to the Met on weekends when I was at Juilliard, and would just wander around looking at the incredible artwork. John was very big on that. He was an amazingly self-made man. He was a truly creative person. He was, his family escaped Europe as the Nazis were coming to power. They emigrated to South America. They became import-exporters. Then they had to leave there, and they ended up in the United States. Then he ends up in the producing business. I mean, he was constantly reinventing himself. And he was big on people investing in themselves. So, and recreating yourself. He recreated himself so many times. So, the fact that I've gone from theater to television to now voice work, I think he would love that. I think he'd say, great. You can't, when I was studying at Juilliard, I thought, I'm just going to do theater. I'm going to be a purist. I'm going to do Shakespeare and Greeks, and I'm just going to be a classical actor. You can't do that. Life is more complicated than that. You grow, you want to do more, you should do more. You can't limit yourself. The thing you do, though, is you take what you've learned and you inform it in what you're doing in the future. I really try to make my voice work richer with what I've done on stage. And I know Andrea sees that and appreciates it in the performances she gets from me. I'm amazed that animation has taken off the way it has, and that this is what I've ended up doing. It's like that John Lennon song, life is what happens to you when you're busy making other choices.
Mm-hmm.
I never made this choice, but this is where life brought me. So, it's worked out in the long run.
Now what about singing? You gonna do more of that?
I enjoy it. I don't think anyone's going to pay me to do it, but I enjoy doing it. Yeah, we're done? Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.